The night my wife asked me to sign away our marriage, she smiled like she was giving me a gift, not taking my life apart. Snow pressed softly against the tall windows of the Caldwell house, white and quiet, while inside everything glittered like money trying too hard to look warm. The Christmas tree stood 12 feet high in the corner of the living room, wrapped in gold ribbon, glass ornaments, and tiny white lights that made every polished surface shine. Beneath it sat dozens of presents in silver paper, each one tied with a perfect bow. I remember thinking how strange it was that a room could look that beautiful and still feel like a courtroom. My name is Nathan Whitaker. I was 42 years old that Christmas Eve, wearing a charcoal coat Claire said made me look like a man who had given up. Her father, Richard Caldwell, stood by the fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand, watching me the way a banker watches a bad loan. Her mother, Mary Ann, sat on the cream sofa with her pearls resting against her throat, her smile thin enough to cut paper. Claire's brother, Blake, leaned against the bar, already amused before anyone said a word. And beside my wife stood Trevor Langford, clean haircut, expensive watch, the kind of man who looked like he practiced confidence in the mirror. Claire didn't touch him. She didn't have to. The room had already placed him where I used to stand. I had spent 12 years learning the sounds of that family's judgment. The pause before my name. The little sigh when I parked my old Ford in their circular driveway. The careful way Marion asked whether I was still working that logistics job, like steady work was something to apologize for. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. A man can survive being underestimated. Sometimes he can even use it. But that night, under the tree, with carols playing low from hidden speakers and the smell of cinnamon candles filling the air, I understood something colder. Claire wasn't embarrassed by how little they knew about me. She was embarrassed by what she thought she knew. She stepped forward holding a cream-colored folder, the kind lawyers use when they want bad news to look civilized. "Nathan," she said, soft enough to sound kind to anyone who didn't know her. "Let's not drag this into the new year." No one moved. Even the ice in Richard's glass seemed to stop settling. Claire placed the folder on the walnut coffee table between us and set a silver pen on top of it. The pen rolled half an inch, then stopped against the edge of the papers. "Sign it," she said. "Give me one decent Christmas gift for once." Blake looked down, trying not to laugh. Marion closed her eyes as if my humiliation required grace. Richard took a slow sip of bourbon. Trevor stared at the tree like he had already been invited into next year's family photo. I looked at my wife's face, at the woman who once ate cold pizza with me on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment and called it our little kingdom. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were steady. That hurt more than anger would have. Anger means something is still alive. This was different. This was a decision that had been rehearsed. I picked up the folder. Divorce papers. A financial waiver. Mutual release of claims. Clean language. Sharp teeth. Claire had already signed. Her name sat on the last page in blue ink, elegant and final, right above the date, December 24th. For a second, the lights on the tree blurred, and I heard my own breathing, slow and controlled, like a man standing on ice and refusing to look down. They thought I was reading because I didn't understand. I was reading because I did. Every clause, every trap, every door she had just closed on herself without knowing what stood behind it. 12 years of marriage had taught me how to keep my face calm. 20 years in business had taught me never to interrupt someone making a mistake. So I took the silver pen, placed the papers on the table, and signed my name beneath hers. Nathan James Whitaker. The room exhaled. Claire's shoulders softened with relief. Richard's mouth curled in satisfaction. Blake finally let out that little laugh he had been saving. To them, I had just surrendered quietly under a Christmas tree in a house that never felt like mine. But as I set the pen down and looked at the woman who thought she had finally freed herself from a poor husband, one truth settled inside me as clean and cold as the snow outside. She had signed first. That was her mistake. Claire waited for me to say something. I could see it in the way her chin lifted, in the tiny tightening at the corner of her mouth. She had prepared herself for anger, maybe pleading, maybe one last embarrassing attempt to make her remember who we used to be. I gave her none of it. I closed the folder, squared the corners with my fingertips, and slid it back across the coffee table. The silver pen rested on top, like a tiny monument. Richard gave a low chuckle from the fireplace. "Well," he said, his voice warm with bourbon and victory, "at least the boy knows when the party is over." Boy, I was 42 years old, and he still called me that whenever he wanted the room to remember who owned the walls. Blake laughed first. He always did. A second too loud, a second too eager, like a dog waiting for permission to bark. Come on, Dad, he said. Give him credit. He did not make us explain the big words. Marian touched the pearls at her throat and looked at Claire with that practiced sorrow rich people wear when they are enjoying themselves, but wanted to look painful. This is for the best, sweetheart, she said. You have carried enough disappointment. Carried. Like I was luggage. Like 12 years of mortgage payments, late-night repairs, quiet sacrifices, and swallowing every insult at that family table weighed less than the label they had put on me. Trevor shifted beside Claire, polished shoes silent on the hardwood floor. He did not smirk. That would have made him honest. Instead, he gave me a sympathetic nod, the kind men give when they want to look decent while standing on someone else's place in the world. No hard feelings, Nathan, he said. I hope you land on your feet. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was so small. They saw the coat, the truck, the job title Claire repeated to them like a confession. Logistics manager. Warehouse operations. Regional supply chain. Plain words. Useful words. Words that made people like the Caldwells look right past you. They did not see the holding companies. They did not see the quiet acquisitions under names that never appeared beside mine. They did not see the 700 employees whose paychecks cleared every Friday because I understood the kind of work men and women do when no one claps for them. They did not see Whitaker Capital Group because I had spent years making sure people like them never did until I wanted them to. Claire folded her arms. The diamond on her finger caught the tree lights and threw them back cold. You do not have to act noble, she said. You can be angry. You can say whatever you came here wanting to say. I looked at her then, really looked. The red dress, the careful makeup, the hair pinned softly at the back of her neck. She looked beautiful in the way magazine pages look beautiful, glossy and untouchable and easy to throw away when the month ends. I did not come here to say anything, I told her. I came because you asked me to spend Christmas Eve with your family. Blake made a sound under his breath. Richard set his glass on the mantel. And now you have, he said. So let us keep this clean. Clean. That was another word people used when they had already made a mess and wanted someone else to carry it out quietly. I stood slowly, buttoned my coat, and felt every eye in that room follow me. The tree glowed behind them, gold and white, throwing soft light over hard faces. For a moment, I could see all of us reflected in a glass ornament near Claire's shoulder. Her family clustered together. Trevor close enough to belong. Me standing alone, small and curved in the reflection, like a man already removed from the picture. Marianne cleared her throat. Nathan, you understand this means no claims later. No support. No sudden regrets. Her voice carried sugar over steel. I picked up my gloves from the arm of the chair. I understand exactly what she signed. The room went quiet in a way I enjoyed more than I should have. Only for a second. Only long enough for Richard's eyes to narrow. Then Blake ruined it with another laugh. Listen to him. Still trying to sound important. Claire looked away from me, and that was the final cut. Not the papers. Not the jokes. Not Trevor standing there, with another man's future written all over his face. It was my wife looking away because defending me would have embarrassed her more than leaving me. I nodded once, not to them, but to the last version of myself that had still hoped there was something here worth saving. Then I walked toward the front door. Behind me, Richard said, "Merry Christmas, Nathan." I stopped with my hand on the brass handle. Snow moved beyond the glass like static on an old television. I did not turn around. "Merry Christmas," I said, and I meant it, because by morning, every one of them would understand that they had not thrown me out of their family. They had thrown themselves out of my protection. The cold outside did not hit me all at once. It slipped under my collar slowly as I stepped onto the Caldwell porch, soft snow collecting on the shoulders of my coat, the house glowing behind me like a jewel box full of people who had mistaken shine for value. I stood there for a moment with my hand around the car key, listening to the muffled rise of their voices through the front door. They were laughing again. Not loudly, not cruelly enough to be called cruel by anyone who loved polite excuses, but enough. Enough to tell me they believed the hard part was over. Enough to tell me they thought the poor husband had been handled. My Ford waited at the end of the circular driveway, dusted white, parked between a black Range Rover and Trevor Langford's silver Mercedes. The Ford looked out of place there. So did I, according to them. Maybe that was why I had kept it all these years. It reminded me what people revealed when they thought there was nothing to gain from respecting you. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and sat in the dark without starting the engine. The dashboard clock read 9:47. Christmas Eve. 12 years of marriage ended in a room that smelled like cinnamon and expensive scotch. I looked at my left hand. The ring was still there, catching a thin line of light from the porch. I did not take it off. Not yet. Some things deserve a witness when they end. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder. Then again, the screen lit up with a name I had been expecting. Marcus Reed. I let it ring twice before answering. Tell me, he said. No greeting. Marcus never wasted words when the ground was moving. He had been my attorney for 14 years, but more than that, he was the one man who knew every locked room in my life and where I kept the keys. I looked through the windshield at the Caldwell house, at the golden windows, at Claire's shadow crossing the living room behind the curtains. She signed first, I said. Silence came through the line, clean and careful. All pages, he asked. All pages. Initialed the waiver? Twice. No changes. None. I heard him exhale, not with surprise, but with the kind of satisfaction a man allows himself when a bridge finally holds under weight. Then it is done, he said. I leaned back against the seat. Snow tapped the windshield in tiny white flecks. Inside the house, someone moved past the front window. Blake, maybe, still holding a drink, still telling himself he was clever because he had been born near money and never learned the difference between inheritance and intelligence. They think they protected Claire from me, I said. They did, Marcus answered. From the version of you they invented. That line stayed with me. The version of me they invented. The harmless husband. The man with the old truck. The logistics manager who knew shipping schedules, warehouse leases, freight contracts, vendor margins, and nothing worth respecting. They had built that man carefully over the years, one insult at a time, until even Claire believed he was real. What they did not know was that every company I publicly worked for had been folded into a larger structure I controlled. What they did not know was that Whitaker Capital Group had started in a rented office above a hardware store in Cleveland and grown into a private investment firm with assets spread across manufacturing, medical supply chains, commercial real estate, and regional transportation. What they did not know was that I did not wear plain clothes because I lacked money. I wore them because I liked knowing when a handshake was honest. Marcus's voice lowered. Caldwell Industries' emergency financing package is still on your desk. Richard's bankers called again this afternoon. They need a commitment before the 26th or the line freezes. I watched the Christmas lights blink along the roofline. Red, white, like a warning nobody inside could read. And after tonight? I asked. After tonight, Claire has no marital claim to your holdings, no path into the trusts, no standing against the acquisition, and no argument that you hid assets from her for the purpose of divorce. She signed a mutual release voluntarily, with her family present, using counsel her father selected. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not in relief. Relief was too simple. This felt heavier, like hearing the final click of a door you had spent years trying not to close. They handed you the cleanest ending possible, Marcus said. No, I said, opening my eyes. Claire did. Through the window, I saw her near the tree, one hand touching Trevor's sleeve while Richard lifted his glass again. The scene looked warm from a distance. It always had. That was the trick of expensive houses. They taught you to confuse light with love. I started the engine. The Ford rumbled awake, low and steady, a sound I trusted more than any toast ever made in that house. What do you want to do about Caldwell Industries? Marcus asked. I shifted into drive, but kept my foot on the brake. The answer should have been easy. Let them fall. Let Richard explain to 1,200 workers why his pride mattered more than their paychecks. Let Blake learn that a company was more than a last name on the building. But I thought of the people on the factory floor, men and women who had nothing to do with the living room behind me. People with mortgages, kids, prescriptions, electric bills due in January. I knew what it meant to wait for a paycheck. I had built my life around never forgetting it. We save the workers, I said. Not the family. Marcus did not hesitate. Then I will prepare the papers. I looked one last time at the Caldwell house. The tree glowed in the window, perfect and bright, standing over the papers Claire thought had set her free. She had no idea those signatures had just moved the first domino. File at 8 in the morning, I said. Then I drove away, slow through the snow, leaving fresh tire tracks down a driveway where they believed I would never matter again. The road away from the Caldwell house wound through a neighborhood where every lawn looked staged for a postcard. Wreaths on every door, white lights along every roof. Inflatable snowmen swaying gently in the wind like nothing ugly had ever happened behind all that glass. I drove slowly, not because the snow was heavy, but because memory is a dangerous thing on Christmas Eve. It follows you home whether you invite it or not. 12 years earlier, Claire had not cared what I drove. She had climbed into that same Ford in a blue sundress and laughed when the passenger door stuck. We were 29 and 30, sitting outside a small diner off Route 22 with 2 cups of coffee and 1 slice of apple pie between us, because she said dessert tasted better when it was shared. Back then, she did not ask what my watch cost. She asked what kind of man my father had been. I told her he was quiet, stubborn, and kind in ways that never showed up well in photographs. She reached across the booth and touched my hand like that answer mattered more than any number in a bank account. That was the woman I married. Not the one standing beside Trevor under a 12-foot tree, but the one who once helped me carry secondhand furniture up 3 flights of stairs in August heat, laughing so hard she had to sit on the landing. Our first apartment had a window unit that rattled all night and a kitchen floor that sloped toward the refrigerator. Claire called it character. We ate takeout on moving boxes, hung cheap curtains, and made plans with the reckless faith of people who believed love could turn any small room into a kingdom. I had already sold my first software stake by then. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to never worry about rent again. I did not tell her the whole number. I told myself it was caution, not deception. My mother had spent the last 5 years of her life explaining why my father should have protected himself from people who loved comfort more than character. I listened. So when Claire loved me in that little apartment, when she kissed me with paint on her cheek and said she did not need fancy things, I wanted to believe I had found something money could not distort. For a while, maybe I had. She used to leave notes in my lunch bag when I worked long days building out the logistics side of my first company. She used to fall asleep on the couch waiting for me, one hand tucked under her chin, the television glowing blue over her face. She knew I worked hard. She knew I was building something. She just did not know how large the foundation already was beneath us. The first crack came so quietly, I almost respected it. A dinner at her parents' house, 3 years into the marriage. Richard asked me what I saw myself doing long term, and before I could answer, Claire laughed and said, "Nathan is not really the corporate type." She meant it lightly. Everyone smiled. I smiled too. But later in the car, when I asked what she meant, she looked out the window and said, "You know, you are practical. Grounded. Not ambitious in that showy way. Practical. Grounded." Safe words, until they are not. Then came the invitations where my name was printed after hers. Then the charity events where she introduced me as my husband, Nathan, he works in operations, and moved on before anyone could ask more. I watched her learn embarrassment one room at a time. At first, she defended me with a hand on my arm, then with a tired smile, then not at all. Her parents fed that feeling like kindling. Richard would tell stories about men who made something real of themselves. Mary Ann would send Claire listings for homes in neighborhoods where people measured worth by gates and golf memberships. Blake would joke that I dressed like I was always ready to fix a loading dock. Each remark was small enough to deny and sharp enough to leave a mark. I could have ended the act any time. I could have walked into one of those dinners with a tailored suit, a private banker, and documents proving I had more money than Richard Caldwell ever controlled. Some nights, I almost did. Pride has a voice, and mine was not silent. But another voice always answered. If she needs proof to respect you, then respect was never there. So I waited. Not as a test with a finish line, but as a husband hoping the woman he loved would remember the apartment, the diner, the stuck truck door, the version of us that had nothing to perform for anyone. Snow thickened as I pulled onto the interstate. The city lights blurred ahead, soft and distant. My phone stayed quiet. No message from Claire. No second thoughts. No "Are you home safe?" That silence told me more than the papers had. Somewhere behind me, she was still in that warm house, accepting comfort from the same people who had taught her to be ashamed of the man who had spent 12 years protecting her from the truth of their own dependence. I kept both hands on the wheel and drove through the dark, past shopping centers and closed gas stations and office parks sleeping under white roofs. By the time my building rose ahead, glass and steel against the winter sky, the ache in my chest had settled into something steadier. Not peace. Not yet. More like alignment. The past had made its final argument. Now the future was ready to speak. The lobby of my building was empty when I arrived, except for a night security guard named Paul who looked up from a paperback and gave me the same respectful nod he gave every tenant, whether they wore work boots or Italian leather. That was one of the reasons I liked the place. Nobody performed surprise for money there. I took the elevator to the 43rd floor, listening to the soft mechanical hum rise around me, and watched my reflection in the brushed steel doors. Snow melted on my coat shoulders. My face looked calm. That almost bothered me. A man expects to look ruined when his marriage ends, but sometimes grief is too deep to show itself right away. Sometimes it sits behind the eyes, quiet as a locked office after midnight. My penthouse was dark when I stepped inside, all glass walls and city lights, the kind of view Claire had never seen because I had never brought her there. Not because I was ashamed of it, because some rooms reveal too much too quickly. The place was not flashy. No gold fixtures. No marble staircase. Just clean lines, warm wood, shelves full of old books, and a small Christmas tree near the window with plain white lights. I hung my coat, removed my ring, and set it on the kitchen counter. The sound it made was tiny, a soft click against stone. Still, it felt louder than anything Richard Caldwell had said all night. I stood there for a long moment, looking at that circle of metal, remembering the day Claire put it on my hand with tears in her eyes and a voice full of promises she probably meant at the time. That is the trouble with broken vows. Most of them are not lies when they are spoken. They become lies later, after enough small choices pile up and the person who made them stops looking back. At 10:36, Marcus called again. "I am sending the final acquisition draft now," he said. "You should review the employee protection clause before I circulate it in the morning." I walked into my office and turned on the desk lamp. The room came alive in amber light. On the wall hung a framed photograph of my father standing beside his old delivery truck in Akron, Ohio, one hand on the hood, face serious, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He never had much, but he understood something the Caldwells never did. Money is not power if everyone around you has to become smaller for you to feel tall. My computer woke, and the Caldwell Industries file filled the screen. Revenue decline, debt exposure, vendor defaults, pension risk, 1,200 employees across 3 facilities in Ohio and Pennsylvania. The numbers told a story Richard would never tell at dinner. He had borrowed against equipment, delayed supplier payments, and used short-term credit to protect the family image while the business underneath him weakened year by year. Blake had approved consulting contracts that led nowhere. Trevor Langford, the man standing beside Claire like an upgrade, appeared in 3 separate advisory payments tied to financing that never closed. I read every page without touching my drink. There are moments when anger tries to make you careless. I had learned not to take orders from it. Clause 7, I said into the phone. Strengthen it. No layoffs for 18 months except for documented misconduct or voluntary retirement. Full back pay for the delayed holiday bonuses. Health coverage continues uninterrupted. Marcus paused. That will cost you. I know. Richard will call it unnecessary. Richard will not be in charge. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The decision had already become a structure, beams locking into place. Marcus typed on his end. I could hear the faint clicking through the line. And the executive team? He asked. Independent audit. Immediate suspension of discretionary compensation. Blake removed from finance authority. Trevor's contracts frozen pending review. Claire. Her name landed differently in the room. I looked at the ring on the counter through the open office door, a small gold circle under kitchen light. Claire is not an executive, I said. She gets exactly what she signed for. Marcus let the silence breathe. He knew me well enough not to fill it. Outside, the city moved beneath falling snow, headlights crawling along the streets like sparks under glass. Somewhere out there, people were wrapping gifts, setting alarms for early flights, pouring cocoa for children who still believed morning could fix everything. I envied them for 1 second. Then the screen refreshed, and Caldwell Industries stared back at me with all its broken machinery, late invoices, and people depending on a last-minute miracle from a man their owners had just laughed out of a living room. That was the part Claire never understood. My wealth was not a pile of numbers waiting to impress her. It was responsibility. It was leverage. It was the ability to step between careless people and the damage they caused. By midnight, the revised papers were complete. I signed digitally, authorized the escrow transfer, and scheduled the filing for 8 o'clock in the morning. The office printer hummed softly, releasing a clean copy page by page. I gathered the documents, clipped them together, and placed them in a black folder. Not cream-colored, not pretty, just business. Before turning off the lamp, I looked once more at my father's photograph. "We save the workers," I said quietly. "Not the pride." The city clock somewhere downtown struck 12, though I could barely hear it through the glass. Christmas had arrived. So had the bill. By 7:45 on the morning after Christmas, the city looked half asleep and freshly judged. Snow sat on parked cars in smooth white layers. Traffic lights blinked over quiet intersections, and the sidewalks outside my office building carried only a few sets of footprints. Most people were still home with leftovers, wrapping paper, and families they trusted. I was in the back seat of a black town car with Marcus beside me, reviewing the final packet while the driver took us west toward Caldwell Industries headquarters. The building stood on the edge of an industrial park outside Columbus, for stories of glass and brick with the Caldwell name mounted above the entrance in brushed steel letters. I had seen it before in reports, photographs, drone surveys, tax filings. Seeing it through the car window felt different. Buildings remember the people who walk into them afraid of losing their jobs. The parking lot was fuller than I expected. Maintenance crews, accounting staff, a few line supervisors called in after a holiday they probably did not get to enjoy. Marcus glanced at his watch. The board was told an emergency investor meeting starts at 8:30. "Good," I said. "Let them be on time for something." He looked at me, almost smiling, then returned to the documents. Inside the lobby, the receptionist recognized Marcus first. Lawyers have a way of entering rooms like paperwork has already won. She stood quickly, smile uncertain, and reached for the phone. "Mr. Caldwell has not arrived yet," she said. "He is expected any minute." Marcus placed a business card on the desk. "We will wait in the main conference room." She hesitated, then looked at me. Not long, just enough to decide whether I belonged. I was wearing a dark gray suit Claire had never seen, a navy tie, and the same plain watch I wore with work shirts. Her eyes returned to Marcus because Marcus looked like the kind of man who carried authority in a leather briefcase. That was fine. I had never needed people to recognize the blade before it touched the paper. The conference room sat at the end of a hallway lined with framed photographs of Caldwell family milestones. Richard cutting ribbons. Blake shaking hands. Claire at a charity gala, smiling beside her parents beneath a banner about community leadership. I stopped at that one for half a second. Her smile was perfect. Her hand rested lightly on Richard's arm. There was no photograph of the factory floor, no machinists, no shipping crew, no office staff staying late to fix invoices Blake had ignored. Just the family, polished and centered, pretending a company was something they posed in front of rather than something other people carried on their backs. At 8:29, Richard Caldwell entered with his coat open, face flushed from the cold, Blake behind him with coffee in one hand and irritation in the other. Trevor came in last, wearing confidence like cologne. Richard saw Marcus first. Then he saw me seated at the head of the table. The room changed temperature without the thermostat moving. "What is this?" Richard asked. Not loud. Men like him save volume for people they can afford to dismiss. His eyes moved over my suit, my folder, my calm hands resting on the table. Blake laughed once, but it came out thin. "Nathan? You have got to be kidding me." I did not answer him. Marcus opened the black folder and slid the first document across the polished table. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Whitaker Capital Group executed its secured acquisition rights under the emergency debt facility held by Northbridge Commercial Bank, including senior claims against Caldwell Industries and its subsidiaries. Richard stared at the document as if the words were arranged in the wrong language. Trevor leaned forward, face tightening. Blake's coffee cup lowered slowly to the table. "Whitaker," Richard said. My name had been in his mouth for 12 years. But this was the first time he seemed to taste it properly. I met his eyes. "You needed financing before the 26th. You also needed a buyer willing to assume payroll exposure, vendor debt, pension risk, and 3 facilities your son helped mismanage." Blake's face reddened. You do not know anything about this company. Marcus placed another stack of papers on the table. He knows. Enough to have owned your primary lender since August. Silence settled hard. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just the heavy, office-building silence of men realizing the floor was not where they left it. Richard sat down without meaning to. His hand moved toward the paper, then stopped. Trevor cleared his throat. There may be a misunderstanding. My advisory group was arranging alternative capital. I looked at him then. Your advisory group collected $370,000 in fees and delivered nothing but delays. His mouth opened, then closed. It was the first honest thing I had seen him do. The door behind us opened, and Claire stepped in wearing a camel coat over a cream sweater. Her hair pinned neatly like last night had been difficult but manageable. "Dad, what is going on?" she asked. Then she saw me. For 1 second, she looked annoyed, as if I had followed her into a life I had been dismissed from. Then her eyes moved to the documents, to Marcus, to her father's face, and annoyance began to drain into confusion. I stood, not quickly, not for effect, just enough to make the room understand where the meeting now lived. Caldwell Industries will continue operating, I said. Holiday bonuses will be paid by Friday. Health coverage remains active. No factory employee loses a job because your family confused image with leadership. Claire stared at me like I was a stranger wearing her husband's face. Richard's voice came out rough. "Who are you?" I looked at the man who had called me boy under his Christmas lights and answered him with the truth he should have cared enough to learn long before that morning. "I am the billionaire your family needed last night." Claire did not speak at first. She stood inside the conference room doorway with one hand still on the handle, her camel coat dusted with melted snow, her eyes moving from my face to the documents and back again, as if the truth might change shape if she looked at it from a different angle. I had seen that expression before, but never on her. I had seen it on executives when a deal slipped away, on bankers when collateral disappeared, on men who confused confidence with control until the paperwork corrected them. Richard found his voice before she did. "This is absurd," he said, pushing back from the table. "You expect me to believe you have been sitting across from my daughter at Thanksgiving dinner for 12 years while secretly buying banks and companies." I looked at Marcus. He opened another folder and placed a printed ownership chart in front of Richard, clean lines connecting Northbridge Commercial Bank to Whitaker Capital Group, then to the debt instruments tied around Caldwell Industries like ropes they had tied themselves. Richard stared at the page. Blake leaned over his shoulder, and for once, he did not laugh. Trevor's face had gone pale in the flat conference room light. "There are disclosure rules," Trevor said, grasping for the kind of sentence men use when facts start closing doors. Marcus turned one page. "All disclosures were made to the required parties. Your name appears here only as a paid consultant with no successful funding outcome, which is why the audit will be interested in your invoices." Trevor sat back slowly. The expensive watch on his wrist suddenly looked too bright, like a prop from the wrong movie. Claire stepped into the room. "Nathan," she said, and my name sounded different in her mouth now. Not softer, not loving, measured, careful, like she was approaching a ledge. "Why did you never tell me?" There it was. Not "I am sorry." Not "I was wrong." Not "how could I have let them treat you that way." Just "why did you never tell me?" As if the wound was not what she had done, but what she had failed to know before doing it. I kept my hands folded on the table. "I did tell you who I was," I said. "You just kept asking what I was worth." Her face tightened. "That is not fair." The words landed with a tired little sound inside me. Fair. I thought of the apartment with the sloping kitchen floor, the 4 doors sticking in the rain, her laughing into my shoulder when we had nothing worth showing off. I thought of every dinner where she let them shave pieces off my dignity, because correcting them would have cost her comfort. "No," I said. "It was not." Richard slapped the ownership chart with his palm, not hard enough to be violence, just enough to remind the room he was used to sound replacing substance. "This company has my name on it." I looked at the brushed steel letters visible through the window across the parking lot. "Names are not payment," I said. "Payroll is. Vendor trust is. Safe equipment is. Pension funding is." You protected the sign while the building underneath it cracked. Blake stood abruptly. "You cannot just walk in and take over." Marcus did not look up. "He already has." That sentence did what a shout could not. It emptied the room. Richard sat back down. Blake stayed standing because pride sometimes forgets what legs are for. Claire looked at her father. waiting for the version of him that always had an answer. He had none. Outside the glass wall, employees had begun gathering near the hallway, drawn by the rumor that something important was happening. A woman from accounting stood with a folder clutched to her chest. A floor supervisor in a navy jacket watched through the open blinds. These were the people Richard mentioned in speeches and forgot in decisions. I stood and opened the conference room door wider. "Mr. Alvarez," I said to the supervisor, reading the names stitched on his jacket. "Please ask department leads to meet in the training room at 9:30. Payroll corrections will be announced today." He blinked, surprised to be addressed directly. "Yes, sir." There was fear in his voice, but also something else. Hope is cautious when it has been disappointed too often. I turned back to the table. Effective immediately, Richard Caldwell is removed from operational authority pending audit. Blake Caldwell is removed from finance access. Trevor Langford's consulting contracts are frozen. Marion Caldwell's discretionary foundation reimbursements are suspended until reviewed. Claire's breath caught at her mother's name. "You are going after my whole family?" I looked at her then, and I let her see the part of me that was tired, not cruel. "No, Claire. I am stopping your family from going after everyone else." She looked away first. That small motion carried more truth than anything she had said. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he gathered himself behind old habits. "You enjoyed this," he said, sitting there last night, pretending to be small. I thought about the Christmas tree, the silver pen, Blake's laugh, Marianne's pearls, Trevor's practiced sympathy, Claire's dry eyes. "No," I said. "I gave you every chance to be decent when you thought decency would not benefit you." The hallway outside had grown quiet. Even Blake had stopped moving. I picked up the black folder and handed it to Marcus. The meeting was over, though no one wanted to admit it. As we left the conference room, Claire followed me into the hall. "Nathan, wait." Her voice cracked just enough to sound human. I stopped, but I did not turn around right away. Through the front windows, snow fell over the parking lot, covering every car the same way, the luxury models and the old pickups, the executive spaces and the employee rows. For one clean second, everything outside looked equal. Then I turned to face my wife, and she looked at me like a woman finally understanding that the man she had thrown away had not been beneath her. He had been holding the floor under her feet. Claire followed me halfway down the hall before she seemed to remember there were people watching. Her steps slowed near the framed photograph of her parents cutting a ribbon 5 years earlier, both of them smiling beneath a banner that promised growth, integrity, and community. The words looked tired now. She folded her arms across her coat, not because she was cold, but because pride needs somewhere to hide when it runs out of room. "You let me humiliate myself," she said. I looked at her for a moment, standing beneath fluorescent lights that did not flatter anyone. The woman in front of me had been my wife before she became a stranger with my last name. I could still see the old Claire if I looked too long. The diner booth, the moving boxes, the laugh that came from her chest instead of her image. That was the dangerous part. Memory can dress a wound in familiar clothes and ask you to forgive the knife. "No," I said. "I let you choose." Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. "Not yet. My family pushed me. You know how they are. They made me feel like I was wasting my life." "They opened the door," I said. "You walked through it." She flinched at that, small but real. Behind her, down the hall, Marcus spoke quietly with Mr. Alvarez and the woman from accounting. Words like payroll, health coverage, and bonuses floated through the air. Real words. Human words. The kind that mattered more than Claire's sudden need to rearrange blame. She lowered her voice. "If I had known, Nathan," I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the sentence was so perfectly broken. "If I had known." For words that sounded like regret until you listened closely. She did not regret what she thought I was. She regretted what I turned out to be. "That is exactly why I did not tell you," I said. "Because if you had known, you would have stayed." Her face changed then. The truth had landed where excuses could not reach it. "That is unfair," she whispered again, but this time the word had less strength. "You wanted me to love you without knowing your life." "You knew my life?" I said. "You knew the man who came home tired. You knew the man who fixed your mother's porch railing without being asked. You knew the man who sat through every dinner where your father turned my name into a joke. You knew enough." Her mouth parted, then closed. There are silences that protect people, and there are silences that expose them. This one did both. A door opened at the end of the hall, and several employees stepped out, pretending not to look at us. One older man in a Caldwell Industries jacket paused when he saw me. "Sir," he said carefully, "is it true the bonuses are still coming?" Claire turned toward him, startled, as if the hallway had reminded her the company contained people beyond her family. I nodded. "By Friday. Direct deposit first. Paper checks for anyone who needs them." The man swallowed hard and looked down. My wife was worried. "Thank you." He walked away quickly, but not before I saw his hand brush his eyes. Claire watched him go. Something moved across her face, something close to shame, but shame is only useful when it arrives before the damage. "I did not know it was that bad," she said. "You did not ask." The answer was simple, and maybe that was why it hurt her. She looked back at me, voice softer now. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I glanced toward the conference room, where Richard sat collapsed into silence. Blake stood with his phone in his hand, like a man searching for someone powerful enough to save him. And Trevor stared at a contract that had turned from costume jewelry into evidence. "There is nothing private left, Claire. You made our ending a family event." Her shoulders sank. For the first time that morning, she looked less like Richard Caldwell's daughter and more like the woman who once believed a cheap apartment could be enough. "But resemblance is not resurrection." "I made a mistake," she said. "You made a decision," I answered. "A mistake is grabbing the wrong coat. A decision is signing papers in front of people who laughed while you did it." Her eyes finally filled. She reached for my hand, then stopped when she saw I was not wearing the ring. The absence landed harder than any speech I could have given. "Where is it?" she asked. "On my kitchen counter." Her breath trembled. "So that is it." I looked through the glass wall toward the factory floor in the distance, where machines waited under bright lights and workers stood in small clusters, hoping the rumor of rescue was not another disappointment. "No," I said. "That is not it. I am going to spend the next few months saving what your family nearly destroyed. I am going to protect the people who kept this place alive while your father protected his pride. I am going to make sure Blake cannot touch a payroll account again, and I am going to find out exactly what Trevor was paid for." Her voice broke on his name. "There is nothing between Trevor and me." I believed her, strangely enough. But belief did not heal anything. "That was never the worst part," I said. "The worst part was that you wanted there to be someone better than me, and you let your family convince you better meant richer." She covered her mouth, and this time the tear fell. Quiet, controlled, almost respectful. I did not move to wipe it away. A year earlier, I would have. Maybe even a week earlier. But last night under those Christmas lights, she had signed away the man who still reached for her pain before his own. Marcus appeared at the end of the hall, folder in hand, waiting without interrupting. The building was waking up around us. Phones ringing. Doors opening. A company holding its breath. Claire looked at me one last time as if searching for the husband she understood. I wished him well, wherever he was. "Nathan," she whispered, "what happens to me?" I met her eyes, and my voice stayed calm because calm was all I had left to give her. "You get what you asked for. A life without me in the way." By the end of that week, Caldwell Industries no longer felt like a family monument. It felt like a company again. The lobby Christmas tree stayed up through New Year's, but the old portraits came down from the hallway and were moved into storage, not destroyed, not mocked, just removed from places where working people had to pass them every morning like reminders of who mattered. Payroll cleared on Friday at 9:13. I know the minute because I was standing on the factory floor when phones began buzzing in pockets and hands started reaching for screens. No cheering at first, just disbelief. Then a woman near the packing line covered her face, and Mr. Alvarez looked at me with the expression of a man trying very hard not to let relief embarrass him. That was the only applause I needed. Richard resigned from the board after the audit found enough poor judgment to fill a banker's nightmare, though not enough to make me cruel. Blake was removed from every account with a decimal point in it. Trevor's advisory contracts dissolved the moment sunlight touched them. Marianne sent one handwritten note to Marcus, calling my decisions excessive and unnecessary. I kept it in the file because history should always include tone. Claire did not call for 3 days. Then, on December 30th, she came to my building just after sunset. Paul called up from the lobby, his voice careful. "Mr. Whitaker, there is a Claire Caldwell here asking to see you." Not Claire Whitaker. Claire Caldwell. The correction had already begun. I almost told him no. Then I looked at the small tree near my window. It's plain white. lights glowing against the glass, and remembered that endings do not become clean just because we avoid the last conversation. "Send her up," I said. When the elevator opened, she stepped out wearing a dark wool coat and no jewelry except small pearl earrings I had given her on our 5th anniversary. She looked tired in a way makeup could not repair. The kind of tired that comes when a person has slept, but not rested. She stopped a few feet inside the room and looked around. The city spread behind me, 43 floors of lights and traffic and winter air. Her eyes took in the books, the framed photograph of my father, the modest tree, the kitchen counter where my ring still sat in a small ceramic dish. "So this was always you," she said. "Part of me," I answered. She walked closer to the window, careful not to touch anything. "I kept thinking about what you said, that I would have stayed if I had known." Her reflection met mine in the glass. "I hated you for saying it." I waited. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can give the truth is silence. "Then I realized I hated it because it was true," she whispered. The room did not move. The city did not pause. Somewhere far below, a horn sounded, ordinary and distant. Claire turned toward me, and the tears were already there, but she did not use them like a key. That mattered. A little. Too late, but a little. "I am sorry," she said. "Not because of the money. Not because of Dad. Not because everything changed. I am sorry because I let them make you small in my eyes, and then I punished you for the size I imagined." For 12 years, some wounded part of me had waited to hear those words. I thought they would feel like warmth. Instead, they felt like finding a letter delivered after the house had been sold. "Thank you," I said. Her face tightened. She had hoped for more. People always do when apology costs them something. "Is there any way back?" she asked. I looked at the ring in the dish. Gold, simple, faithful longer than the people who wore it. I remembered her hand in mine outside that diner, the apple pie, the sloping kitchen floor, the first Christmas when all we could afford was a 2-foot tree from a drugstore, and she said it was perfect because it was ours. I honored that memory by not lying to it. "No," I said. The word was soft, but it held. Claire closed her eyes. One tear slipped down, and this time she wiped it herself. That was when I knew she might survive what she had chosen. Not unchanged. Not forgiven in the easy way people ask for when consequences arrive, but awake. I picked up a small white envelope from the counter and handed it to her. "This is the final copy of the divorce filing. Marcus will send everything through your attorney. There is also a separate letter confirming that I will not pursue anything from your personal accounts." She held the envelope with both hands. "You are still protecting me." "No," I said. "I am refusing to become what hurt me." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, she did not argue. At the elevator, she turned back. "Merry Christmas, Nathan." The words came late, but honestly. I gave her the same answer I had given Richard at the door, only this time, I meant it without bitterness. "Merry Christmas, Claire." The doors closed, and her reflection disappeared from the steel. I stood in the quiet for a long time. Then I took my wedding ring from the dish, walked to the small tree by the window, and hung it on a low branch where the white lights caught the gold. Not as a promise, not as a wound, as proof that something real had existed before it failed. In January, Caldwell Industries reopened under a new name, Whitaker Manufacturing and Logistics. No family crest, no polished slogan, just paychecks, working machines, and people who knew the lights would stay on. I kept the old Ford. I kept the plain watch. I kept the habit of looking people in the eye before I looked at their resume. And every Christmas after that, when snow touched the city and trees appeared in windows, I remembered the night Claire signed those papers beneath all that gold light, believing she was removing me from her future. She was right, in one way, but she was wrong about what she had lost. She did not sign away a poor husband. She signed away the last man in her life who had loved her. Before knowing what she could give him,